Okay, welcome to our Erev Shabbat Parashat class, Parashat Tessave, also Erev Shabbat Zachor, the Ner Tamid, the constant light in the temple, in the sanctuary, in the Bet Knesset, hanging in front of our Aron Kodesh in every synagogue in the entire Orthodox, or maybe even non-Orthodox Jewish world. Let's talk about it. The parasha opens up Parashat Tessave with this very discussion. And we can just start from the end and then we can work back. What we see, practically speaking, before us is that the setup of a synagogue, Sfaradi Ashkenazi, currently, historically, is that there's some form of light. Now, besides the fact that Ashkenazim always set up candles by the teba in which the Shliach Sibur, the Hazan, is operating on a regular basis, whether it's Shahdit or Minha. On top of that, there is another arrangement of what we call a Ner Tamid, a constant light. In modern day, it took the form of electricity. Of course, it wasn't always that way, but electricity, some electric light that is either on top of the Aron, hanging down in front of the Aron, in that general region. And it's supposed to be always on. If you pay the electric bill and you change the bulbs consistently, you'll have this light on. So let us talk about the origin of the concept. Beginning of Parashat Tessave opens up. Parashat Tessave actually begins at the end of Perek Kav Zayin, chapter 27 of Shemot. But you have to search no further than the beginning of the parasha. Hashem speaks directly to Moshe Rabbeinu, and he commands him to command Bnei Israel to select the purest of oil, and it's for the purpose of laha'alot ner tamid, to light, to kindle, to arrange a constant lantern, lamp, light. There should always be, and we're talking about actual fire here, of course, a constant light lit, and it's referring to the Bet HaMikdash. And we know that within the Bet HaMikdash, it's referring specifically to the menorah, the keli, the vessel called the menorah. Continues the Torah, Be'ohel Mo'ed Mechus LaParochet Asher HaEdut. Location. Ohel Mo'ed is the Mishkan, later the Bet HaMikdash. Outside the parochet is the curtain which separates the Kodesh Kodashim and the Kodesh, the main area of the Mishkan or Bet HaMikdash, and the Holy of Holies in the end. Asher al ha'edut. The parochet, the curtain, is on or in front of the edut. That's referring to the Aron, the ark that houses the luchot, the tablet, which is nicknamed here the edut, the testimony. It's so interesting that this detail is even necessary over here. Why in the world? Just say it's in front of the parochet. We have the location. Go no further. We don't need to know the contents of the Kodesh Kodashim, which is behind the parochet. It serves no purpose right now. Oh, well, the Torah tells us. Aaron and his children, meaning the head Kohanim, should arrange for this Ner Tamid from evening till morning before Hashem. This is called a Hok, Hukat Olam, or an eternal law for Bnei Israel. This parasha has a twin, and that is in the book of Vayikra, in the end of Parashat Emor. He says in the Aliyah Shivi'i, it's in Perek Kaf Dalet in Vayikra, and it says in Pasuk Bet, Savet Bnei Israel v'ikru elecha. Sounds very familiar. Shemen Zayid Zach Katid Lamaor LaHa'alot Ner Tamid. Almost the exact wording, right? Again, Mehus the Farochet Ha'edut, same location, Bo'el Mo'ed. Yaruch Oto Aharon again. Me'erev Ad Boker L'Fnei Tamid, says the word Tamid there twice. The only addition here there is that it says Al HaMenorah Torah, specifically calls out the menorah pure of gold, Ya'aruch et hanerot l'fnei Adonai tamid. and it actually says the word tamid 3 times. That's where this should take place, which we assumed anyway. The Torah is explicit with it in Parashat Emor on the menorah. So there you have it. What exactly was the procedure of this lighting? What was the protocol in the Bet HaMikdash to have this lit? So first of all, when it says Ma'erev ad Boker, that she interprets this to mean that this light, this tamid, this constant light, has to be overnight. Make sure it's going overnight. But the Ramban brings down their sources. There's a Gemara, there are Midrashei Hachamim to speak about this ner tamid to really be tamid, to really be constant. At least that was the intent around the clock. And that's the more traditional approach to this pasuk. But again, what really happened? So in order to understand why it was done, and this is read in the early Korbanot part of Shaharit every morning, we need another pasuk. That pasuk is from the end of Parashat Pekudei and Shemot, chapter 30. And there it says, and we say this pasuk in the Ketoret, Baboker, Baboker, Behetivot, Hanerot, Yaktirena. It says, in the morning, when you clean the Nerot, Yaktirena is talking about the Ketoret. But it's relating to the morning when you are cleaning out and setting up the Nerot. So Hachamim were Doresh, Baboker, meaning there's going to be 2 events in the morning in which you clean and relight the Nerot. And we know, and this is a Mishnah in Masechet Tamid, that says that there are 2 different lightings of the cleanings and lightings of menorah, a 5 and a 2. There were 7 candles. A 5 and a 2, or a 2 and a 5. Now, why is that? So, first of all, you break it into 2. Baboker. This is a tradition that we learned from Torah Sheba'al Peh. Why is it 5 and 2? Why isn't it just 6 and 1? It's called a ner tamid, singular, right? So the Gemara explains that's from another pasuk. It says behetibo et hanerot in plural. So there can never just be one candle maintenance. It has to be plural. It has to be at least 2. So it became 5 and 2. Okay, fine. The Mishnah says that the Kohen walks in, and if he sees the 2 eastern lights lit, he cleans out the rest and leaves those 2 eastern lights lit. If he sees the 2 eastern lights have gone out, he cleans them, light them from whatever else is lit, and then afterwards clean the rest out. Okay. Now, what are the 2 eastern lights? There's a machloket. There are those that say it depends what position you take on what position the menorah had. The menorah, some say, was facing perpendicular to the Mishkan, which means north and south. It means you'd be facing the menorah when you walk in, and the menorah, the east is just the middle light. It's said to be the eastern, the middle light. You're facing it, right? So it's going. You're facing west. The back is east. It's the middle one. There are those that say, however, and this is more traditionally accepted, that the menorah was going north-south. And therefore, when you walked in, you faced not a flat menorah, but a menorah that's going the same direction, instead of the same direction of the Mishkan. And the Kohen would actually then come around to face the menorah, not facing the Kodesh Kodashim, the end of the Mishkan of the Bet HaMikdash, but facing what would be the right side, which is the north, right? So according to that, the first 2 lights that you hit would be the eastern lights. The light that's called the ner tamid, the constant one, is the second one. That's known as the ner ma'aravi, ironically, as the western light. Why? Because relative to the first one, it's the first western light that you hit. The furthest one that you first face is called the eastern light, right? Everything beyond that is western. The first one that you hit is the second light, and that's why it's called relative to the first. It's the west, the ner tamid or ner ma'aravi, and that's the one that supposedly has to be constant. And those first two, you didn't want to ma'avir al hamizvot, pass over mizvot. So there was the first two that the Kohen either left lit, or if they were not lit, he would first clean them, arrange them, and then relight them. Okay, so that was the protocol in the morning. What's the purpose of all this? What does this get us? What's the purpose of having something constantly lit? The menorah had a purpose, obviously. There was a function. It really wasn't very active. It just stood there lit, but there was absolutely an objective of the menorah. But in the menorah, the idea of having it constantly lit, and specifically this one ner, the ner tamid, ner ma'aravi. So the Abad Banel has a very practical approach. He says, listen, you walk in, there's no electricity, by the way. You walk in to the Mishkan, it could be at night. You walk in, it's dark. Moshe Rabbeinu had permission to walk in whenever he wanted. He didn't need an invitation. Whoever walked in, first of all, he had to be conscious of a presence. Know that there is a Shekhinah dwelling here. And he had to have fear, he had to have cognizance. And therefore that Ner gave that message, besides practically being an actual light that allowed someone to operate. Perhaps Aharon needed it. It was right by the Ketoret. Remember, the outside Mizbeach was outside. But this isn't four closed walls. There's no moonlight even. Perhaps Aharon needed it to start working on the Ketoret inside, to start working on the rest of the menorah. You got to walk in, as they say, Lahavdil Motel 6, I'll leave the light on. We'll leave the light on for you. Someone got to leave the light on. And that was the Ner Tamid on a practical level, says the Abad Banel. And of course, as we said, when you walk in and see that, you're gripped. You're gripped within a constant existence of a presence, of a godly, blatant, concentrated, so to speak, Shekhinah presence of God there. Okay, Rabbi Hirsch has a very fascinating idea, and I have to point out to you that this term Me'erev ad Boker, from evening to morning, is mentioned one other time, and that is in the Mizbeach, the large copper Zbach which is outside the Mishkan, outside the Beit HaMikdash, where the Korbanot were offered. It also says there in Parashat, beginning of Parashat Tessave, that it was constant fire, right? That's the other time. So there's a fire on the Mizbeach from evening to morning, and also this ner tamid inside ma'erev ad boker. And Rabbi Hirsch explains this term ma'erev ad boker refers to not physical activity, because physical activity is when people are awake and active during the day. Then there is a more of a time at night of relaxation and rest, but it's also a time that's available for the intellectual work. That's when the mind gets going. That's when we study Torah. The ideal time at night is to study Torah. That's when we work on the intellect. And it's that menorah that stands for the light of Torah that is going, right? That's where the intellectual work has to get going. So specifically, Me'erev ad Boker, during that peaceful time and that more intellectually focused time, or that spiritual time, is when you need this constant light. That's what Rashi says, really referring to the overnight to be going, and that's Rabbi Hirsch's explanation. All right, beautiful. You have further than that is the Sefer HaChinuch. This is actually Mizvat Aseh. It's listed in the Rambam as a Mizvat Aseh, to maintain the nerot constantly, all of the nerot of the menorah. And he explains to specifically have at least one ner dolek. That's our Western, so to speak, ner tamid, constant light in the Beit HaMikdash. And he calls it la Hagdalat Habayit. Hagdalat Habayit, for the elevation of the prestige and status of the Mishkan and the Beit HaMikdash. Lechabot u'teferet be'anei haro'im. He uses the same terms of the functions of the clothing of the Kohanim. Lechabot u'teferet, for glory and for honor. And also here are the candles, for the glory and honor to the eyes of all who see it. And naturally, we know, traditionally, culturally, in a house, The candelabra was always something of prestige. Even today, a candlelit dinner, a deal, something of prestige and importance. And it really, this lit candelabra, giant golden one, at that, in the Mishkan and the Bet HaMikdash, is really the honor, it's the prestige, it's the status of the Mishkan and the Bet HaMikdash. And he says when someone walks in and sees the slit, he's automatically gripped with, it instills in him a certain awe and a certain anava, a certain humility, because he is all of a sudden, as the Abarbanel mentioned, he's gripped with this idea that God is here. And therefore, the Ner Tamid elevates really the importance and the status of the Mishkan and of the Bet HaMikdash. So those are some of the really practical and conceptual reasons why this Ner Tamid has to be there. But really, if you want to go to the more original sources of Torah Shebe'al Peh, they focus on something. And by the way, you know that this all was not in the more Shekhinah concentrated part of the Bet HaMikdash. And that's why the Torah says it's mehus tafaruk ha'edut. It's outside the curtain. Why is that? Because inside the curtain needs no light. God needs no light. This light wasn't for God. This light was for people. And all the above reasons that we mentioned were for the purpose of the workers, the employees, so to speak, the participants, the Kohanim, the leader, Moshe Rabbeinu. That's why it's mehus tafaruk. On the other side, our side of the curtain, because it was therefore Torah is pointing out specifically for us. Hashem does not need that light. But we did not yet address this unusual term that the Torah uses after it says the curtain, outside the curtain, Asher al ha'edut, both here and in Parashat Emor. The curtain happens to be covering the edut, the testimony, referring to the Aron. So we don't need to know at this point what the contents of the Kodesh Kodashim are. We just need to know what the menorah is outside the curtain. And B, why call it here the edut, the testimony? So this goes back to our original sources. This is both found in Masechet Shabbat, Kabet Amud Bet, page 22b, and also in several sources in the Midrash. The Midrash says the following on edut, on this label given to the Aron and the Luchot of the testimony, and the location identified here of the menorah outside the curtain, which is covering the edut. Says the Gemara in the Midrash, Edutu lechol ba'e olam shashechina shora b'Yisrael. The Aron, which houses the Luchot, is a testimony not just to the Jewish people, to all inhabitants of the world. The Shekhinah, that the divine presence, is amongst Am Yisrael in their house, in God's temple, which is an amazing concept. And that is, it's almost here, the holiest vessel we have, the Aron, containing the original Luchot. That itself is only a facilitator. That itself stands testimony to the menorah. Unbelievable. How all of a sudden the holiest vessel is being used for something else. And that is, I hereby stand testimony to what's on the other side of this curtain, which is a menorah, a candelabra, that has constant lights lit, that shows and demonstrates the existence of God to the entire world. And the Gemara and the Midrash go on to say, you might say, well, this is really for practical purposes for the light. Hey, wait a second. They went 40 years in the Midbar with no light. They went to the light of God, right? So obviously, this light is not for God. It's himself. He doesn't need light. And not even necessarily for the sanctuary and the temple itself. It's edut, and he repeats itself again. It rather is a testimony for the inhabitants of the world that God is here. My eduta. And what is the actual subject of testimony? Rava says, Ze ner ma'aravi. This is the Western light that you put in it an amount that allows it to always light. it's really unbelievable that this shifts the centerpiece, the centrality, the focus of the Beit HaMikdash outside the Kodesh Kodashim into the Kodesh, to the Hechal, and specifically on the Ner Ma'aravi. This concept, by the way, of Edut for Ba'er Olam, the Shekhinah is Israel, made the menorah the international symbol of Judaism. People think it's the menorah, the Hanukkah. It's not. It's the menorah. The Beit HaMikdash became the international, not the Ark, not the Aron. The Aron's famous. But the menorah is the international symbol of Judaism. It's part of why we have this tradition to have a menorah figure in our Sidur, which is recited before Baruch She'amar traditionally. And there is the Lam Naseh Michinot Mizmor Shir. What's the content of that Mizmor? Lam Naseh Michinot Mizmor Shir. It's international knowledge of God. That is the subject matter of that Mizmor. And of course, the Mizmor aligns well. It's 7 Pesukim, 7 branches, 49 words, the 49 ornaments on the menorah. We write it in the actual figure of the menorah. We look at it. But when we look at it, is the Rabbi, the Ramban, the Yaakov, it provides us for protection, etc. But we look at it because we're staring into testimony and we're staring into the symbol internationally across the 7 continents that there's a God in Israel. And it turns out that this Ner Tamid, this constant candle, is beyond the practical, beyond the conceptual, is actually the symbol and the constant reminder in the minds and the intellect and the conscience of Am Yisrael, and by extension of Umot HaOlam, of all those who walk on planet Earth, that there is a God and He has chosen to plant Himself, to, so to speak, dwell and have His divine presence among Am Yisrael in the ultimate and objective times of history in the Mishkan, in the Beit HaMikdash. And without it, we can't compare that consciousness and that knowledge of God. Only yearn for those days to come back and pray for them, which will come in the times of redemption and Mashiach. But until then, we have our humble light in every single synagogue and sanctuary across the planet, in front of our Aron, in front of the Aron. The Aron, housed in the Torah, conceptually speaking, is simply a testimony to that cute electric light that hangs on the outside of it, because that, says the Midrash, the Gemara, going back to our Pesukim that talk about Tamid and Edut and testimony, that little light, could be beautiful light, is what the real focus is in terms of a Kadosh Baruch Hu's presence and the ultimate objective of hope to return to that reality of us and the entire world, knowing that indeed the Shekhinah is here, whether it's inconspicuous or blatant, and it's here to stay. And that is our Ner Tamid in our Mishkan and in the actual Mishkan of our private temples, of our synagogues, always to remain there and to come back in full force in times of Mashiach. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen. Shabbat shalom.